welcome back to the Gnostic Informant, and you are about to attain true gnosis. And today I'm joined by Ross Nichols, who, if you don't know by now, is the author of the Moses Scroll. And I got links in the description for this book, the Moses Scroll. It's the Shapiro Scroll. It's taken the internet and the academic world by storm because we don't know what to do about this thing. This is a mystery that needs to be solved. And this book talks about that. And I'm telling you, you were on here about a month or two ago, and we did a video in the desert talking about this thing, and people really enjoyed it. But if you haven't got the book yet, links in the description. On top of that, he also has a YouTube channel, and you guys really need to subscribe. This is one of the channels that I really, really am behind right now, supporting. And as you see how I got the subscription going, hit the subscription. You don't even have to go in the description of my video. It's in the title. That blue hyperlink text, just click that, and you'll see the red button for subscribe. It's that easy. Do that right now and come right back. Please subscribe to Ross Nichols. And today we have today we're going to talk about an amazing topic, which is the Siloam inscription. And what that is here's an image of it. It's an inscription that's underneath Jerusalem in the tunnel of Hezekiah that Hezekiah dug out. And so if you guys paid attention, I have a video on this actually. And I'm just going to pull up just for 1 second before we get this story behind it. And if you see, I hit all the way down Hezekiah's tunnel. And I was with you then during this time. And you guys can watch this video later if you haven't watched it now. We go all the way through the tunnel, and then we find the actual inscription. See, there's Ross right there pointing his flashlight on it. And as you can see, we're looking at the inscription. That's all. You guys can all check that out later. But we're going to get into the story behind it right now. This is a fascinating story. And welcome to Gnostic Informant. And my question for you off the bat is, what is the story about this inscription, this Siloam inscription? When did we find it? And also, if I'm not mistaken, the story is that Hezekiah dug this tunnel out, and he's tied to this inscription as well. Tell us all about it.
Hey, man, thanks for having me, Neil. Look, I miss you, man. It's been, I guess we were together about 2 months ago, hiking through all sorts of places in the biblical Holy Land, as people call it.
It was Indiana Jones stuff going on there.
And then you left me there. I had another tour to lead, and you ran off. I didn't even know you were going to Egypt.
I went to Egypt.
I started seeing you on social media, and I thought, what is he doing? And somebody said, oh, he went to Egypt. So
yeah.
So I guess welcome back to you. I know you've been doing a lot of great interviews, and so thanks for having me on, Neil. Look,
absolutely.
This Siloam inscription, it truly is an important discovery, particularly in the field of archaeology in the Levant, in the land of Israel. It is a very interesting inscription, and the story of it is fascinating. It's so compelling, so interesting that I'm actually working on a book right now about the discovery, the decipherment, and the ensuing debate that took place after it was discovered. And let me tell you, Neil, this debate is still going on today. I want to touch two other things. So after I got back from Israel, you and I haven't spoken a lot. I know you've been busy. I've been busy. But one of the things that I'm working on, a friend of mine knew that I was doing research on the 19th century specifically in the year 1880. I'm going to talk about the discovery of the Siloam inscription momentarily, but I'm doing research on this discovery. And a friend of mine who is at Haifa University wrote me and he said, hey, Ross, the Albright Institute in Jerusalem is going to host a conference on Conrad Schick. Now, Conrad Schick is a very important figure in 19th century Jerusalem. And this friend of mine said, you will probably want to put in a paper proposal to deliver a paper at this Albright Institute series, this conference. So I did. My paper was accepted, and I'm going back to Israel. I wish you could go with me, but I'm going to go the first week of February, first and second week, because I have some other research to do with some of my friends. So while I'm preparing the paper to deliver at the Albright, This is right around Christmas time, December I guess the 24th, something like that. It was real close to Christmas. An announcement hits social media. And the announcement is that more inscriptions were discovered in this Siloam water system. Notice I didn't say the Salon Tunnel, Neil, because I'm going to describe a much more elaborate. It says you went with me. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
We'll catch your viewers up. And so five, Neil, not one, not two, five new monumental inscriptions have allegedly been discovered in this tunnel system in Jerusalem. And if that wasn't enough, just last week, they announced that the Siloam Pool is going to be excavated by the IAA, the Israeli Antiquity Authority. So everything is focused on Siloam. Of course, I'm focused on it, but it makes me happy that the academic world is now looking in that direction. So
Right.
let's talk a little bit about the discovery, because that's where I'm really focused right now. In fact, the joke is, in my family, I have 6 kids and 9 grandkids. And if anybody calls me, they say, the grandkids call me Saba. They say, Saba, you're not in 1880. It's 2023 now. So I have to pull out of the 1880s. So here's the deal. So 1880, Conrad Schick is over the London mission in Israel. And he's also a teacher. He has students in his class. And 2 of his students, one of which is named Jacob Eliyahu. Jacob Eliyahu is a Sephardic Jewish descent. He is a student of Conrad Schick. And everyone in Jerusalem that's interested in the ancient city knows about this tunnel, right? This tunnel that goes from what we call Mary's Spring to the Siloam Pool. When I say Mary's Spring, that's the 19th century name. The biblical name of that is the Ge-hinnom Spring. So a tunneling system that goes from the Ge-hinnom down to the pool at the southern edge of the city of David. So 2 boys, as the story goes, Jacob Eliyahu and his padna named Sam, decide that they're going to take a bet. They kind of encourage each other. Jacob is going to start in the south. Sam is going to start in the north, and they're going to meet in the middle. Now they have to overcome some fear, Neil, because and you and I'm talking about, it was really bad then. I mean,
if you have any bit of claustrophobia, you can't do it.
Yeah, well, let me add to that fear factor. No, I don't. I just like to say this because it makes me sound tougher. I've read the reports from 1838 when it was rediscovered in the modern day by the American biblical scholar Edward Robinson. He describes the harrowing story when he went through in 1838. Neil, there were places where he had to scoot on his belly. It was so low at the time because the floor was filled with silt and dirt and mud, and just hold his lips above the water line so he could make it out. I mean, that's how bad. Yeah. So the locals had these. It was bad enough, as you see when we go through now.
I was trying to find an image of this. Is actually one of the good spots where you can actually stand up.
Yeah,
see, there are like that's kind of the norm of how thin it gets. But there's also parts where you have to duck your head. Like this guy, you see him standing up tall. That's the easy part.
That's right.
There's like a good 5-10 minutes of walking where you're like this.
Look, and just so your viewers know, the parts you're talking about, the average height for quite a ways is about 4 feet tall,
right?
And you're wading in about a foot of water.
Yeah.
So not quite, as you remember, it's not quite to your knees, but about a foot. So you're kind of stooped over, and you got to have a flashlight so you don't knock your head as you're going through. But add all of that to a much less cleaned out tunneling system. And they had 2 rumors. One rumor was that a genie lived in the pool, because before they regulated the water from Miriam Spring or the Ge-hinnom, the water would rise at certain times, and God help you if you're stuck in that tunnel, see, particularly in the low sections. I mean, that would be pretty scary. If even in the cleaned out tunnel, if the water started rising, I would be moving to get out of that thing. But anyway, so one was that there was a genie that lived in, the other was that it was a dragon. But anyway, two boys.
Wow.
Now, Jacob Eliyahu is 16 years old at the time. He starts on the southern end. Now, there you go. So the southern end, Neil, is where you come out, where when we went through, and your video shows this, towards the end, we come out. So he comes in the southern end. Now remember, at the time, and even today, there are no lights, so you have to have a flashlight. Well, they had a candle. He has a candle. He has a string tied around his neck with other matches in it. And he's walking, and it's not, the floor is unlevel. There are rocks and rubble. And he trips about 25 feet into the tunnel from the southern edge. And as he stumbles into the water, he comes up and he's feeling his way. He's got his light, his candle, and he says, he thinks he sees letters. Now he's by himself. Sam started from the other side. And we later learn in the story that Sam gets spooked and just leaves. He doesn't even go through. So Jacob says, I think, he's telling himself, I think these are ancient letters. It's on the eastern wall, about 25 feet in, and it's not even all the way out of the water at the time. The water was higher. So he goes back and he tells Schick, his teacher, I think I found some writing. So Conrad Schick leaves the class. I'm sure he probably said, what are you doing there? You skipped class. You're walking through the tunnel. You're supposed to be doing geography right now.
That's someone like you and me, like going down.
Yeah, he's supposed to be in class. He has to go back with wet pants and tell his teacher, hey, you're not going to believe this.
Yeah, we better go down there.
Yeah, he's going to say, well, what had happened was So, but he tells him, and Schick goes down, and Schick is a scholar. In fact, he's referred to, not educated in, he doesn't have an advanced degree, but he is self-educated. He's a brilliant man. He is in touch with the Palestine Exploration Fund scholarship team, as well as the German Palestine Association. So he's connected with scholars in Germany and in England. And remember, in the 19th century, Neil, these guys, everybody wants a piece of the Holy Land, right? So you have these two organizations, the Germans and the English, and everybody wants to know if there's anything discovered. The Palestine Exploration Fund is doing a survey of Palestine. And I'm not using the term in the political sense. So some people, Palestine versus Israel, we're talking about the Ottoman period, when everyone referred to this entire region as the Palestine. So now Schick goes in there, and of course Jacob shows him where he found the inscription, and Schick says, by golly, I think you found, I don't know exactly what he said, but he says, I think you found something here. He recognizes that on the inscription are paleo letters. And now this is what we need to get up front. They're lightly etched and they're small. You remember looking at the replica with me, Neil. Remember that the letters are only about a half an inch tall, and they're not carved deeply into the rock. But it looks like the letters, from what he can tell, a lot of the letters have been covered with silicate from the water flowing through the tunnel at the time. But they look very similar to what they were familiar with from the Mesha stela, the Moabite stone, right? So he immediately dispatches a letter to his friends at the German Palestine Association, a scholar by the name of Sokin, and he tells Sokin on behalf of the German Palestine Association, yep, there's the Mesha stone, the Moabite stela. He tells the guys in Germany, by chance, this is what happened. My student stumbled in the water, found the inscription. And so it sets off a media frenzy, if you will. All the German scholars are wondering, what do we need to do? Well, in Schick's plan, in his letter to the Germans, he tells them certain steps that need to be taken place, that need to be accomplished in order to get a squeeze. Now, let me explain that. If you want to get an inscription, you want to get they couldn't get a photograph of it, but they want to get a replica of it, if you will. So you take a piece, sort of like paper mache, and you press it onto an inscription, and then you let it dry, Neil, and then you peel that off. And then what you have is a reverse image of the inscription. But there are some problems, and Schick identifies these. He said, number one, the letters, part of the bottom part of the inscription is covered by water. So we've got to get the water drained out of the tunnel in order to get a good inscription. He also notes the problem with the silicate that's filled in these letters. So he's got some work cut out for him. He knows that in order to get a good inscription, a good squeeze, he's got to do some work. Now, he agrees to take charge of this work. He says, I'll do it, but I'm going to need some money. Now, that's the letter to the Germans. He then turns around. This is that was June 22nd. He wrote that letter. The Germans published it on July the 7th, 1880. Every scholar in Germany knows about it by July of 1880. Walter Bassett is the secretary of the Palestine Exploration Fund at the time, Neil. He says in an article that was published in the British side of the media, he said, I found out about this inscription on August the 3rd. So he notifies the British a little bit later, or they find out about it a little bit later, but within a month, he's notified, in essence, the entire academic world about this inscription. Now, what he also did, he did attempt to replicate what he saw. He sent what he called a copy, which means that he didn't take a squeeze. Remember, he couldn't get a squeeze. So he's standing there with a candle, and he writes down a letter, and he looks. It's hard to make out, but what both groups, the Germans and the English, say is it left much to be desired. Now, one other thing, and you saw this, I showed this to you, right behind on the western wall of the tunnel, directly across from the inscription, there's a niche carved in the rock where he proposed that a lamp was situated. And he further proposed that the inscription was done in situ, meaning whoever did this inscription did it in the tunnel. And but again, the British and the Germans said, we can only make out a few letters. The Germans looked at what he sent them, and they only recognized 4 letters out of the whole thing. And Schick tells both groups that he proposed that there were about 8 to 10 lines of text on that inscription. Now, turns out there are only 6, but we'll get to that. But remember, the bottom is underneath the water level.
Right.
Now, the other thing that I'll point out about the inscription itself, on the eastern wall, when you and I went through, we were looking at a replica. The replica is just affixed to the tunnel wall, but you got to see something, and you videoed it and took some very nice pictures for my presentation. Thank you very much. Of the actual location, which is about 2.5 feet to the south of the replica, where it was dug out from the wall. Another part of the story we'll get to. But that niche behind, on the opposite side of the wall, the ancient Judeans would have put that their lamp there so they could make this engraving. So just to give you a real quick summary of what happens, once the British know about it, the English know about it, as well as the Germans, they begin to make plans. They want to give Schick some money. And because Schick is their man on the ground, he's highly respected. He's their contact in Jerusalem. So they turn things over to Schick. Remember, we're in June of 1880. Now, Schick wants to start immediately, but he's sick. He reports in one of the reports that I found, it's actually called My Work on the Siloam Canal. He says that for several months, he had to fight health issues, and he also had one other problem, the Ottomans. So this is Ottoman Jerusalem. So you don't just do whatever it is you want to do. Everything is watched over closely. So he has to get permission from the Ottomans, and but he has to wait for the right time. Now he says that the time arrived when something interesting happened. The guy he had to get the permit from, the Ottoman that he had to get the permit from, didn't like Europeans, Neil. He was very pro-Ottoman from Turkey, you know, but he didn't have much for anybody other than his own people.
Right.
Well, fortunately for Schick, the guy dies. And the one who takes over happens to be one of Schick's boys, one of his friends. Okay. So he goes to this guy and he said, look, you know, now it's November. It's been a few months. And he says, I need permission, but he couches it in the perfect way. He says, Jerusalem always has water problems. And I think if I can work on this ancient system of water tunneling from the Mary Spring to the pool, maybe I can help Jerusalem's water issues. Right. So, you know, the Ottomans say, go forward and prosper. Do everything you want to do. If you find anything, Schick, you need to let us know. And he says, yeah, I'll be sure and let you know about that. So he gets to work. So he does begin a process. He goes and he hires locals. And so it's helping the economy all around, right? So he pays them a daily wage initially, and then later he brings them under contract. So he's got quite a few workers. Now, remember at the time, it's not this sweet little water park ride that you and I did. This is bad. But these guys are in there and they're bringing out buckets and pails, and he's got shovels he's given them, and they're having to bring rocks and rubble. And so he works on it for a few months, but it's not easy work. The physical labor is one problem, but another problem is it's in the rainy season. So in Israel, you and I, when we went on our tour with Dr. Tabor, November is a good time if you get it before the rainy season starts. But by the time you get to the end of November, December, that's when you're in the seasonal rainy periods. And so work has to stop during that time off and on. Plus, Schick is getting constant notes from scholars from Germany and England saying, hey, can you go in there and try to make a better copy? So he's working. He's trying to get a better copy to him. But as late as December, January, the scholarly world is still waiting for a good copy of this inscription. They don't even know what it says. They don't know for sure how many lines are on it, and they can't even make out but a few letters. Mm-hmm. So imagine the frustration. Here we're sitting on potentially one of the great discoveries in Israel, and nobody knows what it says. So it's very frustrating for everybody involved, not excluding Schick. He wants to get it too.
Yeah. So,
you know, by February, there is a scholar by the name of Archibald Sayce. Now, you and I talked a little bit about this on the tour. Maybe you had read some things about him as well. Sayce's brilliant. At least the word on the street in the day was that he could work in 20 ancient languages. And he reports on February the 7th of 1881. So it's been 8 months since the discovery. Now, everybody knows about this, and he says there was an accident in Cyprus, and I ended up in Jerusalem. So where does he go? Neil, he goes straight to Schick. He says, I want to see this inscription. Now, this guy's a genius. So he goes into the tunnel and he begins looking at it and trying to get his own copy. So Sayce is the first guy that publishes any attempt to read what the inscription says. And we're already in February. He goes through the tunnel on February to the inscription on February 7th. He takes a break. He does some other travel he has to do in and around Jerusalem. He comes back on the 26th and he goes back in there. Now he says that this is bad working conditions, Neil. He's in this tunnel. It's not nice like when we went through. He's cramped up. He's got a buddy of his, John Slater, holding a candle for him. Get it closer, John. I can't see it. So he's trying to read it. But he does a pretty good job considering the working conditions. But he reports that he's fighting off mosquitoes and, it's just bad. There's another guy that is working on this very early on too, Neil. And some who have read my book, The Moses Scroll, know this guy's name. His name is Moses Wilhelm Shapiro. Shapiro is an antiquities dealer. He's a bookseller. He is an agent for the British Museum. Now, Shapiro is one of my heroes from the 19th century.
He's a real Indiana Jones type of character.
He is, he is. And he's a scroll merchant. So he's been around the world. He's very familiar with script. He was involved in a lot of things, which some people tend to side with the standard view that he is a forger and a bad guy. I do not hold that view. But nonetheless, we learn later, and I put this in my book, that he was one of the first people down to attempt to make a squeeze. So he's got his own ideas about what this says, but Sayce's in the limelight. Again, February 7th, February 26th. By the 26th, when he goes in that tunnel, he says this. He reports this in the British paper called the Ge-hinnom. Sayce says, look, Schick is doing incredible work. He says now that he's got the water level down. You remember where we went in at the Miriam Spring, at the Ge-hinnom Spring, and you walk through? The tunnel is 1,750 feet, give or take, from the entrance to the Siloam pool. He's working on that whole area. And if you just walk through it like we did, I think, and we were clowning around a little bit, but what was that video length? Is it about 40 minutes, 35, 40 minutes?
It's an hour long.
It's an hour long. Okay. Yeah.
It's a you're walking, how many miles is it?
Well, it's 1,750 feet.
Yeah.
So it's winding, and you have several false starts.
Right.
And now let me interrupt myself, because people had long associated this tunnel with Hezekiah's tunnel, which we'll talk about shortly, about the biblical passages that talk about that. But the question has always been, how do you start on two ends and meet in the middle? How do you do that? Particularly if we're talking about the 8th century BCE, because Neil, if this was actually done in the 8th century BCE, it's one of the most remarkable engineering feats that has ever been pulled off. How do you, again, two teams of builders. Now, what we know, I'm interrupting myself at the point where no one knows what the inscription says. It's located 25 feet in from the southern entrance. But I'm going to take you back to 1838 first. When Edward Robinson rediscovered the tunnel, he said he proposed that the tunnel was built. Two teams of builders worked from either end. This is in a book that was published in 1842, I believe, by Robinson. And it's called Biblical Researches in Palestine or something like that. So it's already an idea that that's the way they did it. So people since that time, and even up to the modern day that we're having our interview, debate how would they have done it. And one of the theories is that, you know, you like banging on the ground above, which many places in that tunnel, you're deep. You know, you're deep underground.
It's mind blowing how far down we are.
It is. And so, but it's not only, it's one thing that two teams could meet together in the middle. It's quite another achievement, and this is the big one.
Right.
You have to for water to flow, common sense says from the source to the target, you have to have a drop in elevation.
Right.
They've now, modern times have now looked at this, and it is such a slight drop that it is blowing people's minds as to how they, and remember, it's not a straight
Roman aqueducts. Like you can't look like they're flat, but they're not.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, you know, in places in that tunnel, you showed the photo a moment ago where it's way above the head, you know, and in other places we're ducked down. That's not the builders getting tired and deciding not to. It's, they had to, the ground does this above the Siloam aqueduct, the Siloam tunnel, and they had to work their way down to get the level. I mean, it's phenomenal that they even met in the middle. It's even more incredible that it caused the flow of water from point A to point B, but it did.
Well, that's what I'm saying. The original bit, the people who actually dug this out in the ancient world, like, you know, Hezekiah gets the credit for it. I know there's some disputes on if he really did it or not. We'll get to that. That's it. We will get to that.
Yes, indeed.
But it's amazing because of the technology they had in this time period.
That's right.
Limited.
Yeah.
We're talking about digging hundreds and hundreds of feet below the ground and then digging straight across to another area and meeting another person who's coming in the other way.
Yep. And creating the flow. Yeah. It's
no
lasers,
no drills, no, just what do they have? Chisels? What do they have?
Yeah, they were doing it like the old-fashioned way, Neil. Yeah. They're whacking it with, you know, iron. It's in the iron. I mean, they're whacking away at it with iron tools. In fact, we'll get to the text in a minute. I'll read you a text from Sirach.
One thing that I remind myself that makes me not too surprised about this type of stuff is the reward that comes from doing this.
Yeah.
So it's life and death to get this water in here. So it's going to get done. Like they're going to put whoever, whether it's Hezekiah, whoever it is, they're putting all their resources in this project. It's getting done.
Yep. That's right. That's right. Oh. Yeah. And so what we have is we have these different water systems, this underground, let's call it the water system, water conveyance system. It's not just the tunnel that we went into. You remember as we walked down into the city of David, you go down, 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 down. And I remember you videoed all of this and you put it on your YouTube channel. People ought to take that journey and watch that video you put out. It's really good footage. And I remember when you posted it, you said, look, this is just raw. Well, I thought that was brilliant because yeah, you can edit it, you can make it do this, do that, but
I wanted people to understand what the whole experience was like. They from start to finish, there's no stopping. It's dark. It's tight. It's kind of like, oh, that's how it is. Now the video came out that way too. So
yeah, and that's fine. And if people recognize when they watch that you said at the outset, I want to bring you through this system with me. I want you to walk through this with us and get this experience. Look, a lot of people, unfortunately, will never get to go and do the things that you've done and that I get to do. So you're bringing them with you into this ancient system, this tunnel. It's fantastic. So one of the things that happens is after the discovery, we won't go through blow by blow on who said what but very soon they begin to identify that you get a little bit more information comes forward. So you're dealing with a tablet. When I say tablet, on the eastern wall, 25 feet in from the southern entrance or the exit. What?
Is this the one?
That's the replica. That is the replica that's currently on the wall.
But it's in the location where they actually found the actual one.
Yeah, the
Yes.
one that is the where they actually found that inscription. Again, that's the replica. Was about 2 feet to the south, about the same height. That's the one where I said, "Hey guys, come here. I need Neil. I need you to take a picture of me here because I'm doing this lecture, and you kindly obliged, and we got the photo where the actual one was dug out of the wall." But so here's what they began to propose. Now Schick is all in the middle of this. He's the man on the ground. He's going in there and trying to get his workers to keep, it's hard to keep people motivated. They're having problems breathing. At the time, I mean, there's no flow, and it's in the middle. It's horrendous. But here's what he puts out. So here's what we then begin to hear from people like Sayce. He makes his 2 trips. He says in February 26th of 1881, Schick has made some good progress. Here's what we know now. That he believes that it's engraved on the wall in situ. A portion of that rock wall is smoothed for the purpose of engraving an inscription. And it's framed. So like you can imagine the workers chiseled out about a 2 foot by 2 foot square, a little bit more, 2 foot 2 inches by 2 foot 2. And then they engraved an inscription on the polished. I'm not saying but they smoothed it. They prepared it for writing. And then they wrote 6 lines of text. Now, Sayce and Schick and Shapiro, by this point, January, actually, they know that there are 6 lines of text. Still can't really read it. You can pick up letters here and there, but they're not really able to make a guess. In fact, Walter Bassett, the Germans, the English, everybody says that it's the inscription is not discernible at that point. Now what you're looking at now, we're pretty much settled on what it has on there.
Yeah, you can see it now.
This was a frame. So around this prepared section, 2 foot by 2 foot, is a prepared smooth surface. Now the inscription is written on the lower half, and according to the 19th century scholars, only on the lower half. So some people begin to speculate. Well, is there anything written above it? And the answer to that in the 19th century is no. Is there anything below it? No, it's a frame, and then it's rough rock. It's rough rock above the frame at the top. The inscription is 6 lines. It's located on the lower part of the inscription, the prepared place. But over time, you start getting into April and May. Sayce continues to work and clean up his, but in March, something incredible happens. There's a scholar by the name of Hermann Goethe. Now, I know Goethe because of my work on Shapiro. Goethe was the only scholar in the 19th century who looked at the Shapiro manuscript and published an academic booklet, 95-page booklet on the manuscript. And I republished that in English with the help of my friends, the Tylers, last year. It's on, people can find that on my website as well. But it's called Fragments of a Leather Manuscript. But that was Goethe. So Goethe, March 23rd of 1880, he arrives in Jerusalem. He's been sent by the Palestine, the German Association for the Study of Palestine, and he arrives there. Now, Schick had proposed from the beginning, when he first sent notice that Soken published, he said, you know what we need to do? We need to consider cleaning this with a chemical process to get the silicates out of the letters because they can't make a squeeze. So Goethe starts looking around at talking to the other academics on his way to Jerusalem, and he says, anybody have any recommendations on how to clean this the right way? And it just so happens, I think this is another coincidence, like the guy who hated Europeans dying. Now, there was a booklet that was published by a guy named Hübner, and in his book, it's called, basically, I don't remember the exact title in English. It's a German work, but it's how to prepare a surface to take a squeeze is what it is. And he recommended that you dilute hydrochloric acid and you brush that on, and it will cleanse the deposits out of the inscription so that you can then make a proper squeeze and then you can read it. And so that's what he begins to do. But he doesn't start right away. He gets there in March 23rd, and he works with Schick, and they continue to work to clean out the tunnel to get the water lower. Finally, Schick has a carpenter build a wooden platform so you don't even get your feet wet anymore. So this is getting much better now. So by the summer, the inscription is cleaned. Goethe is working on, what does it say? He published 3 works in German. I've translated them all now for my book research. Schick continues to send better and better squeezes to the academic world, and Shapiro is working on it as well. Here's basically what most people propose that it says. I'm going to paraphrase. This is 6 lines of text. It's something like this. People can debate here and there. Behold the excavation. You can look it up on Wiki. That's as good a translation as anything. But basically it describes where 2 teams of workers, starting in the north and the south, worked and worked and worked. As they got closer to one another, Neil, they called. One side said, "Hey, you over there?" The other guy said, "Yeah, keep going." Somehow, pick against pick until they cracked through. Now, this is the story as the inscription. So what we begin to recognize by the middle of 1881 is that this inscription is a notice from the builder or the builders, where it describes what they did. There you go. Look at that. The piercing, the history of the digging, the pickaxes one against the other. And when there were only 3 cubits more to cut through, the men were heard calling from one side to the other, for there was a zedah, we don't know what that means yet, in the rock on the right and on the left. And on the day, and then there's a picture, the Siloam inscription right there. And then it says, the piercing, the workmen struck each to meet the other, pickaxe against pickaxe. There flowed the water from the spring to the pool for a space of 200 cubits, and 100 cubits was the height over the head of the workman. Okay, that is it's supposed to say, and only a nerd like me who's been doing this for a while would know it.
Right.
It's supposed to say the water from the spring to the pool for a space of 200 cubits and 1,000 cubits.
Okay.
And then and then 100 cubits was the height over the head. So let me talk about that for just a second. When the people started getting better transcriptions and started looking at it closer and coming up a little bit more detail about what it might say, Shapiro was the first to propose that it told the story of 2 teams working together. And we know that. I put it in the Moses Scroll. I'm writing about it in my Albright lecture and in my new book. But he's the first one to crack the code. And he does it. He publishes that in July of 1881. And what he also says is that it says 200 and 1,000 cubits. Now, everyone at the time, and I mean every scholar at the time, laughed at Shapiro, and this is why. They said, Shapiro, go back to studying the Talmud, son. Leave this to the scholars, because there's nothing in there about 1,200 cubits. In fact, Shapiro, you're saying that the inscription says 200 cubits and 1,000 cubits. We know, because we're brilliant scholars, that in the Hebrew world of biblical writing, you always use the bigger number first. So it would say 1,000 cubits and 200 cubits. And generally, Neil, that's right. Most often in the Hebrew Bible, we see the larger number and then the smaller number, almost without exception. There is one exception. When they laughed at him, they laughed at Shapiro for saying 201,000. One scholar by the name of Gutta, who's there working side by side with Shapiro, he backs him up. And here's what he says. He says, well, maybe you haven't read Numbers chapter 3, verse 50, where the smaller number is first. You know, so I love this kind of stuff because
I love the back and forth.
You have two types of scholars. You have scholars like my friend Dr. Tabor, who is brilliant in the books, but he gets in the field and he's, you know, how many places did we go on the tour where he said, I worked on this tour, I worked on this dig in this year and did this. And then you have another group also brilliant in the books, but they don't get their feet wet. They don't get their hands dirty. Well, Gutta was the guy that's in the dirt. He's archaeology. He's doing the excavating. He's doing all this.
You got the hands-on experience, and then you have the like sitting in the classroom types who just read the books, which is fine. But we're talking about two different types of people.
Yeah, and I'm not in any way casting aspersions on people who don't do but I prefer my scholars to have hand-on experience as well. Know the books, yes, know the ancient languages, but this is so anyway. Now later, when you look up, what does it say? Almost without exception, unless there's a typo, it's going to say 1,200 cubits, just like Shapiro suggested it said. So he was right all along. So here's what's not in debate. What we're going to talk about is, could it be that this is Hezekiah's tunnel? That's a question. But before we get there, what I want to say is that inscription, people may or may not believe that Hezekiah ever existed or that the Bible is whatever. Here's what I'm going to tell you. What do we know? What we know. Yeah.
Just before you say that.
Yeah.
Sammy Sweetheart sent this super chat a long time ago, right before we started, right as we started. And I think this is relative to what we're getting into. So I might as well just bring it up. Sammy, thank you for the super chat. And the question is, did Hezekiah really pray for water? Or do you think this is a mythologized version of the story?
Well, I'll tell you what.
Perfect timing.
Hey, that's perfect timing, Sammy. Thanks for your question. Let me say this. What we do know is that the biblical text doesn't say specifically that Hezekiah prayed for water. We do know Hezekiah, according to the biblical text, is a man of prayer. Right before the story of this project that he undertook, he is praying. He's praying for his life, actually. He encounters an illness. Isaiah the prophet, according to both Isaiah and the book of Kings, Isaiah goes to Hezekiah and says, get your life in order. You know, you're going to die. And Hezekiah prays to God. And you remember the story about the sundial and so forth. Well, Hezekiah's life is lengthened for 15 years at that point. So we know that Hezekiah is presented as a man of prayer in the biblical writings. In fact, according to at least one writer in the book of Kings, we have other writers evidently for different periods, but one of the writers records that Hezekiah is one of the most righteous kings, and there's none like him. You remember, he has a reform and so forth and so on. Now, we are going to talk about Hezekiah's project. What we do think is there is enough evidence that Hezekiah did a project to bring water into the city because these Assyrians are coming, Neil and Sammy. The Assyrians are coming. And so this would be a time for a righteous man to pray. The Assyrian Empire under Sennacherib is coming to kill you. And
Jerusalem's a walled city, so they're inside their walled city. And they have to figure out a way to keep their resources up. And
and for those who may discount the whole story and not trust the biblical accounts, we do have accounts apart from the Bible. For instance, inscriptions, Assyrian inscriptions and writings from the Assyrian side of things, where Sennacherib, the Assyrian king, says, I had that king of Judah caged up like a bird, Neil.
Yeah.
I mean, but he doesn't say I defeated Jerusalem, which is interesting because in the biblical account, Sennacherib comes down to kill, to conquer, and he leaves. There's this midnight murder that takes place, and God, whacks all the Assyrian soldiers, a huge number of soldiers, and they leave. Well, the Sennacherib doesn't say all that happened. He just said, we caged him up like a bird. He's not going anywhere. Because kings normally don't say that I got my tail kicked and had to go back home. But so what we, there you go.
Quick, this is the what do you call it? The pillar, right? Pillar.
Yeah.
And it, just so everyone is on the same page. As for him, Hezekiah, fear of my lordly brilliance overwhelmed him. He had auxiliary forces, his elite troops, whom he had brought inside to strike the city Jerusalem, his royal city, and who had provided support, 30 talents of gold, 800 talents of silver, choice antimony, large blocks of ivory beds, etc., etc., etc. We could just skip through all that.
Yeah.
Together with his daughters, his palace women, male singers, female singers, brought into Nineveh, my capital city, and he sent a mounted message of me to deliver this payment to, what does that say? To do obeisance?
Yeah, to do obeisance.
Jerusalem survived, and Sennacherib never returned. So, yeah, we do have evidence from hostile sources that are sort of
corroborated.
Yeah. So, this, historically, there is evidence that this event's happened.
That's right. So what we know, and leave Sammy's question there, I'm going to touch it a little bit more. But one thing that we know is that the tunnel, now when I say the tunnel, I'm talking about the one you filmed, the main tunnel. These tunnels, there are several different elaborate numbering systems, and different scholars have looked at it. Primarily from 1911, a guy by the name of Vincent, 1911. He did a lot of good work on it. Many scholars still use his numbering system. I'm not going to bore your viewers with that, because only somebody who's into it like I am needs to care about that level of it. But here's the deal. Let's call this Hezekiah's tunnel, the main, or let's call it Siloam Tunnel. I'm talking the big tunnel with the inscription on the wall. That tunnel is what is being described on the inscription, right? And that tunnel was made, the Siloam Tunnel was made by two teams of workers, or that's what the inscription says, and archaeologists tend to support that. Archaeologists can look at this and say, that's what they're doing here. It's obvious to the archaeological eye that in other words, they didn't just start on one end and whack their way 1,750 feet to the pool. First of all, you'd probably be less likely to hit the pool if you just tried to take it that way than you would by working towards the middle from both ends. But nonetheless, that inscription tells the story of the making of the Siloam Tunnel. Another question altogether is that tunnel, the inscription, the tunnel that fulfills the biblical narrative of Hezekiah bringing water into the city? So here's a little bit more on what Sammy's asking there. How much of this is, biblical versus what? The inscription, Neil, doesn't have a name of a king. It doesn't. There's no clue from the text contextualizing the building of the tunnel. The only thing we can depend on to help us date, and this is kind of tricky, is the paleography. We can look at the paleography on the inscription and we can say, there are various scripts. In fact, I always keep this with me. This is just one example. You can post something later, or I can give a link, but you can look at a table like this and you go, if I'm in that tunnel and I'm looking at it, I go, well, that looks a whole lot like the Mesha Stela, but this particular letter looks different, or this particular letter matches this inscription, which is later. Now, the way that they tie paleographical analysis into dating is if let's say I find an ostraca or something, I think that's it, baby.
Yep.
But people can see that all these different alphabets, and along the top, you'll see numbers which are going to be keyed. So like you see number 13 on the left, and then 12, 11. Each of those, there'll be sort of a map at the bottom that will say this particular script is the Mesha Stela. This is the Siloam inscription, whatever.
Yeah, and you could see when that type of writing was used.
Yeah, that's right. And so the way that became an established and reputable science, part of the math behind that is in an archaeological setting, if you are blessed or fortunate enough to find an inscription, either written on a shirt or who knows what, you look at the surrounding archaeological data and you say, look, we have evidence. This pottery dates to the 8th century BCE. This inscription is found in situ in the same place. Therefore, they're the same. So then you can, and you go, and the script tends to match what we see in other 8th century BCE inscriptions, whatever. So there's still debate about the script, by the way, but let me say this. There's nothing on the inscription that says, at least to this point, that says this tunnel was made when the Assyrians were making their way to conquer Jerusalem. Now, here's what I want to do now. I'm going to read a couple of quick texts if I can.
Sure.
And 2 Kings chapter 20, let's start there. Now, a lot of people know this, but if you're going to study the biblical accounts, you have to bring in every relevant text. So sometimes we get, let's call it synoptic storytelling, synoptic narrative in Kings and Chronicles. So you say, well, Kings talks about Hezekiah, Chronicles talks about Hezekiah. Let's put them side by side and study it horizontally and see what we can learn. 2 Kings 20:20, I'm just going to read 2 verses really. And it says this: the other events of Hezekiah's reign and all his exploits and how he made the pool and the conduit and brought the water into the city are recorded in the annals of the kings of Judah. A missing document. We don't have that document anymore. But it basically, 2 Kings 20:20 tells us that that Hezekiah, Hiskiyahu, knows the Assyrians are coming. He tunnels into the city. Remember, the Ge-hinnom is located outside the walled city. And Hezekiah, this other story, look at 2 Chronicles 32. That gives us a little bit more. 2 Chronicles 32 also tells with a lot more detail the story of his building projects. So I'm going to read a few verses in 2 Chronicles 32. It says, King Sennacherib of Assyria invaded Judah, 32:1. I'm in 2 Chronicles 32:1, and encamped against its fortified towns with the aim of taking them over. When Hezekiah saw that Sennacherib had come intent on making war against Jerusalem, he consulted with his officers and warriors about stopping the flow of the springs outside the city, and they supported him. And a large force was assembled to stop up all the springs and the wadi that flowed through the land, for otherwise, they thought, the king of Assyria would come and find water in abundance. So the idea is this: you're like, this guy's coming. The Assyrians are coming. Sennacherib's coming. We have to get the water, because you can't have Miriam going outside to get water for her family, and the Assyrians are picking you off with the arrow. This is the main water source of Jerusalem. So there's no doubt, what we know archaeologically is that Sennacherib from Assyria is coming against Jerusalem. We also know that we have good looking hair. I like that beard like that. I want to try to do that.
Yeah.
We also know that the Ge-hinnom is the main water source. And at the time, we know archaeologically that Ge-hinnom would have been outside of the ancient city. So it makes sense that Hezekiah, and we have other archaeological evidence that there is a King Hezekiah. We found seals and so forth. So the idea is if there is a King Hezekiah, and I believe there is, shake your head 12-6. Yes, there is.
I think it's
and
pretty
you
obvious.
do have Assyria coming. You're going to bring the water in the gate, because you would say, well, I'm not going to let him come get my water. You know, in any battle, if you don't have water supply for your people, there you go.
That's Hezekiah's stone too.
Look at that. I love
Notice
that.
the Ankh on the right side. That just shows that Egyptian culture was still kind of influencing
Mhm.
the Israelites in that time period. But
That's
yeah,
right. Yeah, so we know some things. Now, people could argue about if there are things, for instance, like Sammy's question, or do you think this is a mythologized version of the story? There's no doubt that we find in ancient history, we find that going on. We find embellishments. We find where a certain ruler is presented in a certain way. And sometimes that's, quite elevated over what the truth may be. But here's what I also want to look at. So look at 2 Chronicles 32, verse 30. This says, it was Hezekiah. I'm reading the JPS, so I'm going to tell you something about the Hebrew here. Who stopped up the spring of water of Upper Gihon, leading it downward west of the city of David. Hezekiah prospered in all he did. All right. So I was curious, because I love to read the biblical text in the supporting documents from Assyria, and I want to put the whole picture together. But one thing plagued my mind, Neil, and it's affected other students of this as well. If you have the Assyrians coming, they're coming now.
right.
Like, they're not going to say, hey, let Hezekiah know I'll be there in a couple of years. I'm coming to get him. So whatever preparations he needs to make, they don't have that kind of time. But you do have your water outside the city. Now, if I'm Hezekiah, I'm going to do a couple of things. I'm going to say, hold up. I can't let him get the water, and we need the water. There are a couple of options. How about you build a big wall east of the Gihon and expand the city wall? That seems to be a hell of a lot easier to me than digging a tunnel 1,750 feet to the south. You get it? Now, the other thing is, I could dig, if I wanted to make a tunnel from the Gihon where it anciently came out of the ground, I could bring it inside the city by making my waterwork move west, right? Just go west until, because it's east of the city wall. I don't have to go 1,750 feet. The Assyrians are coming, Neil.
Right.
I got to get the water in the gate. That's the main thing. I either build me a wall or I dig west. Go west, young man. Go west. So we do know that there are parts of this tunneling system that are west from the Gihon Spring to the west further. And then you remember when we go in, you're going down, you go around. When we stood together, and you remember that blue lit area, and there was even a sign there that said the Gihon, and it had, I think there was a verse on that display where it says where they brought Solomon down to anoint him king at the Gihon. So we know that there are more tunnels than just the long tunnel. In fact, we were a good ways from the Salon Tunnel when we saw this. Remember looking down and you see all the tunneling network there? That's the Gihon. Now, what I find interesting is that this text in 32:30, the Hebrew indicates that Hezekiah, the English I just read said he went downward west. Downward's not in the Hebrew. If I look at that translation, I say, if I'm looking at a Bible map and I go, I want to make it look like that Siloam Tunnel, that does go downward to the west. All the Bible says in 32:30 is that he went, it says extended westward, La'ir David, to the city of David. So I'm thinking that he doesn't, you can still have the Bible ring true, give it a thumbs up on this point. Hezekiah brought the water into the ancient city, just like it says, Lamata, to extend it, Ma'ava, to the west.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then you got the fulfillment. You don't have to imagine if you're one of the workers. Let's say you're the foreman of the work crew, and they come to you, and the official for the king says, "Hey, Hezekiah said to get your people together because he needs you to build a tunnel because the Assyrians are coming." You're like, "Well, okay, you just need the water in the gate." Well, yeah, I do need it in the gate, but he wants it. He also wants you to dig a 1,750-foot tunnel to the south to pour into a pool. Well, why don't we just build a pool? You said the Assyrians are coming to kill us. How about we just build a wall around it? And then that would be easier, wouldn't it? You get the dilemma.
Right.
So you're thinking, what? So long story short, some scholars have proposed that what Hezekiah did is brilliant. It was impromptu, it was quick, and it was in preparation for impending death.
Right.
You got to get the water in. Now, the question of whether this other tunnel belongs to the time of Hezekiah is another question altogether. So if people are listening and they're fundamentalists and they say, yeah, but I believe Hezekiah, all you have to believe if you want to be a fundamentalist, a biblical fundamentalist, is he did a wonderful deed. He got the water inside the old city. Done. Put a check mark in it.
But
right?
it's quite possible, and this answers Sammy's question if this is really a miracle or not. It's quite possible that there already was an existing amount of work being done down there, and Hezekiah sort of finished off what was already started.
Could be. Could very well be. In fact,
I'm just giving it all angles,
Well, let me tell you this, that is it's a very valid point. What we do know is this: when you first walk into the city of David, some of those areas, particularly around the Gihon spring, this water source wasn't just important in the 8th century BCE. In Jerusalem, this water source, the Gihon spring, would have been important to the Canaanites and the Jebusites. And in fact, we know that to be the case. Archaeologically, some of that tunneling network is associated with the Canaanite period. We're going to talk about a new inscription, allegedly, that's been discovered in that tunneling system in an area that is called the Canaanite Pool.
Now, I switched to this one. This is the next super chat. Thank you, Sammy, for that super chat, by the way. That was a great question. But this kind of, this is actually a good question. Where does the water come from?
Yeah. Well, so the Gihon spring is the easy answer. The Gihon spring is this perennial spring. It's there in the old city. It's right there. You can see it. You can step across. You can walk in the waters of the Gihon. To this day, we did it on the tour. Neil and I did this. So the Gihon is the easy answer. It's mentioned like 6 times in the Hebrew Bible. It's located in what we call the city of David. You can find it easily on any Bible map or Google it, Gihon. And the Gihon spring is connected, and I'm certainly not an expert at this field, but it is connected to a water table that is under the ground. This is one of the exit points, one of the only exit points, particularly in the 8th century BCE. But again, you have to do 2 things. You can't let the Assyrians come stop up your water, right? That would be a death blow. You can only survive so long without water. And if that's the only known water source, which many propose it was in the 8th century BCE, then you gotta protect it. Now, in Second Kings 22, in Second Chronicles 32, the translators usually say he stopped up the water, right? Well, he didn't stop. That didn't even make sense. What are you talking about, stopped up? But in Hebrew, the root word there can mean conceal. So for what it's worth, I would suggest, and I'm still looking into all this, Neil, I'm going to be spending lots of time in this tunneling system and looking to the experts that, have written about this and studied it. Particularly one guy I'll mention, Neil, I think you might like this. Other of your viewers might like to watch or read this. It's an article by Shlomo Gil. He's a very brilliant guy, lives in Israel. His paper is called, it's on Academia, by the way, Shlomo Gil. It's called A New Perspective on the Various Components of the Siloam Water System in Jerusalem. Long title, but he looks into this question of the entire system. It's people think like you and I, we go through, the sign says, "Welcome to Hezekiah's Tunnel." You go through you go through all this stuff, and then you walk through the Siloam Tunnel. The implication is this 1,750-foot tunnel was dug in the days of Hezekiah when Sennacherib's coming. Okay. He gets into some really late-breaking, newer, modern scholarship in some of the proposals. To your point, Neil, we have some evidence that this system was important to many, many people before the Israelites ever had this as their capital, right? And so we have to really look at this. In fact, there are inscriptions found in this general area by a guy we're going to talk about in a few minutes that are ancient, more ancient than the paleo we're talking about. In fact, they're Canaanite, right? Proto-Canaanite is what they're being called. So great question. The water comes from the Ge-hinnom, and then you could go down that trail. You go, well, where does the Ge-hinnom come from? I promise you that by the time I get into that part of my book, I'm going to have to know. So I don't know that much about the water table now, but I do want to see that on a map.
Yeah.
And see, does this actually feed into the same as, say, another water source that's mentioned in the Christian Bible,
Yeah.
So that's a good question.
Thank you for that question, Jamie.
Now, if we continue on this train of thought about if Hezekiah gets it to the west, he's done a great deal. Whether he utilizes, and in fact, that's smarter if you already have an older system that you can tie. Neil, the Assyrians are coming, man.
Right.
You're like, that would be like stupid not to use what's already there.
Sure.
So it seems to me that the Hebrew Bible is telling us Hezekiah gets credited with concealing the Ge-hinnom with a wall, if you will, and then bringing it into a pool to the west of the city. Now we know archaeologically Manasseh, who is the king who follows Hezekiah, if you look at any Bible map in any Bible worth its salt, any good Bible map will show you, if you have a map of the ancient city of Jerusalem based on archaeological discovery, you have Manasseh's wall. Manasseh's wall is a further fortification, in my view, of what was done in the time of Hezekiah. But you got to get your water inside the gate. That's mission number one. And now, whether or not they took it from that point at that time or later, it doesn't matter, right? You could get the biblical text and give it a check and say, yeah, that happened. Either way.
By the way, I'm not skipping anybody, but I just pulled this one up because it's so relevant to what you just said. Conceal the Constellation Package says, thank you. Conceal the spring. You'd think the Assyrians would know where all this stuff is. an important military source you think would be common knowledge, even if it wasn't Assyrian lands?
Let me tell you this. You don't know how good of a question that is.
Yeah.
It is a great question. Thanks for that question. You think like I do, because when I'm writing this, what I do is I'm going to look at the biblical text. That is a very important piece of what we have. Now, again, I recognize that some people don't think the biblical text is important. You know, maybe they don't believe it's accurate, that it's been embellished, whatever. But you have two views here. You can say, well, I'm going to go to what archaeology finds, and then if the Bible seems to somehow give me a story about that, I'll look at it. And that's sort of a minimalist approach, whereas a maximalist would say, by goodness, the Bible says that Hezekiah did this. I'm going to put his name on the plaque. It happened, and so that kind of person takes the Bible and then goes to archaeology. Well, what we know from the biblical account is that you do have Assyrians who are scouting the area out before Sennacherib's invasion. And this event that happens in the 8th century BCE, this is not the first time the Assyrians have been here. And there are other expeditions where the Assyrians came and took captives. So do you think, according to this last super chat, they're exactly right? This is a known location. Now, when I say conceal, I don't mean necessarily that the staff of Hezekiah met and they said, we need to build a wall and paint it like it's Mordecai's restaurant.
Yeah, camouflage or something.
Yeah, we're going to... They know it's there, but I mean conceal and reinforce and so forth. So it's...
Put some troops there so nobody can... Yeah,
that's right. So even if... And then you further that, you not only build around it to conceal it out of vision. Yeah, they may know where it is. And this person's point, they're probably exactly right. They know where the water source is. They're going to come down the Kidron and they're going to go up and, shut the water off if they can. So that is a good point. But I think you do two things. You conceal it, you build around it, you secure it, and then you don't stop the waters, but you're basically redirecting the waters to a location where it's not easy for the enemy to come and say, hey, knock that pipe loose, and we're just going to pour their water out into the Kidron Valley. So it is an amazing project, and there's more to it than most people know. But that's a good point. Very good point.
Wow. Now, is there anything else that we didn't cover before we start going to super chats in general? Because I did show the only ones I showed were ones that were just you were already on the subject. I just didn't want to double dip on the subject. That's why.
Yeah, I'm fine. We can take some questions. Okay. I just want to get to at some point, and maybe some of this will come up about some recent discoveries in Siloam. But let's see what we have here.
Okay, so we might be veering around different topics, but it's cool.
That's fine.
Dafa Rafiali, thank you for the super chat. What is the most severe Bible historical error? I mean, I guess it's your own opinion on this one, but yeah, what do you think about? Like, what's the first thing that pops in your head when you think of historical error?
Historical error. Well, the wording of that, I don't know. Let me think. Let's see. That is a good question.
Yeah, it is a good question.
I would say that my identification of error is more in traditional views about what the biblical text says. Does that make sense? In other words, one of my fields of study is the Pentateuch, and I've made this. It's a passion of mine. I want to know. The traditional view, for instance, is that Moses wrote the 5 books. In fact, most Bibles, we open it up, it says the 5 books of Moses. I think, Neil, we even touched on this in the video we had, the conversation we had in the desert. But let me just use this as an example to answer this question from Dafa, is that when we read the Pentateuch, Genesis through Deuteronomy, we get certain things inserted in the text which could not have been written by Moses or at that time. So I'm going to try to, if this is okay for our question here, I'd like to say that historical error is, in my opinion, sometimes identified because of what we call anachronism. So, for instance, when you read a text and you're looking for it to fit a certain time period, a certain author's worldview, and you see something that stands out as that wasn't written at that time. A classic example is Moses writing about his own death, or someone, obviously a later writer, made that point. One other is that if you look at the text, for instance, in Genesis chapter 12, verse 6, this is supposedly recorded by Moses, and it says, the Canaanites were then in the land. Well, you could read over that and nothing stand out at you. But as far as historical accuracy goes, this could not have been written in the time of Moses, because the Canaanites were still in the land, according to the biblical account, even until Joshua and the children of Israel enter the land of promise and eradicate the Canaanites.
Good point.
So for Genesis 12:6 to say the Canaanites were then in the land, they were then in the land, of course they were, until, all the way up. So telltale signs like that, I hope that that's sufficient in terms of what I consider historical error.
That's a good one. That was a good one.
It's just anachronism for me. What do we know? What do we don't know about a time?
Yeah, I think that was a great answer. Thank you for that super chat, by the way.
Yeah, thank you.
The next one is from Constellation Pegasus.
Okay.
Thank you, Constellation Pegasus. I need book references for First Temple Judaism. I have lingering thoughts of this time period before the Babylonian crushing of the ancient Israelites.
Book references for First Temple Judaism. There actually are quite a bit of reports. Let me do this. I'd like to take that question offline. Is that okay, Neil? In other words, there's quite a bit I could discuss. If Constellation Pegasus, if you'll email me at rossknichols@me.com, maybe we could talk a little bit about that offline, because I'll get a little bit more around when you say First Temple Judaism. Can we narrow that down any particular interest? Is that fair?
Yeah, that was.
I'll be happy to do that. And I'm not trying to deprive the rest of your audience of that. But, for me, I would start, obviously, I'll give the whole group this. I would start, obviously, with the biblical accounts.
Sure.
And then I would build from that. And when I look at the biblical text, I look for extra biblical support and or anything which may contradict. It's like when you flashed the picture of the Mesha Stela earlier, that story, we do have a story of a King Mesha in 2 Kings chapter 3. And we also have this monument that's discovered. This has been remade by Monsieur Clermont-Ganneau in the 1800s. But so we have an account in the biblical world, and we also have an archaeological discovery which tells the similar story. I started to say similar. So, but anyway, let's do it that way. Constellation Pegasus. Is
That's
that
great.
work?
Hopefully, Constellation, you definitely should reach out, and that would be kind of interesting to see how that plays out. Thank you for that super chat.
Thank you.
Yaakov, good to see you, Yaakov. Always good to see you. How much did Hezekiah really dig during the war?
Excellent. And we did touch on this, Yaakov. It's again, it is an excellent question, and it shows that you're thinking when you read the text and you go, okay, I read the text. I know that Hezekiah is credited with bringing the water inside the city, but the biblical texts are not, we don't get a whole lot of information. Again, the text that you need to look at, 2 Kings 22, 2 Chronicles 32, And Isaiah chapter 22, verse 9 through 11, by the way, let me read that one.
Yeah.
It's like a good Bible class we're having here today, right?
Yeah,
I love
absolutely. I love it.
All right. Isaiah chapter 22. Remember, Isaiah is a contemporary with Hezekiah. This is the same time. Typically, Isaiah, the prophet, is dated, his prophecy or his prophetic career is dated from 740 BCE to 700 BCE, about 40 years. And it overlaps a little bit with this Sennacherib invasion. So Isaiah 22, verse 9, and you took note of the many breaches in the city of David, and you collected the water of the lower pool, and you counted the houses of Jerusalem and pulled houses down to fortify the wall, and you constructed a basin between the two walls for the water of the old pool. Now, the reason I didn't go into this too much, but my theory right now, and it's always subject to modification as I uncover new evidence. My working hypothesis is that Hezekiah, according to Yaakov's question, he just has to get it in. Well, this is interesting because in Isaiah, who's a contemporary, he talks about this pool, but he also talks about fortifying the wall, and there's something going on between two walls. So could it be that he conceals the to the east of the Ge-hinnom with a wall, and then he's got this little tunneling project that goes west, and then you got another wall. You have another wall. That could very well be. I have one other reference here that gives us a little bit of information. This is from this might be more your specialty than mine, Neil. It's in the Apocrypha. It's found in Sirach.
Nice.
And it says in chapter 48, verse 17, listen to this. Hezekiah fortified his city and brought water into the midst of it. He tunneled the sheer rock with iron and built pools for water. In his days, Sennacherib came up and sent the Rabshakeh. He lifted up his hand against Zion. Doesn't tell us how far he tunnels. It just says he brings it in. So the question, how much did Hezekiah really dig before the war or during the war? We don't know. I know that's people want a little bit more information. My guess is that it was in phases, whether Hezekiah completed the entire project or not. Look, if you follow Hezekiah and you already have water in, maybe Manasseh says, hey, let's keep coming down. Let's keep coming down. In fact, Shlomo Gill's paper, he dates the tunnel, Siloam Tunnel. Let's talk about the big tunnel. He dates it to the Hashmoneans. Now, what's interesting, this is why you have to really look at this, because so many different scholars have different views. We know it's done in phases. The system, the network of water supplies done in systems, in phases. Ronnie Reich, the archaeologist Ronnie Reich, and Eli Shukran did a lot of research here. Eli Shukran with the IAA is a big archaeologist. He knows this area better than anybody. And when they worked together on this project, I don't remember the exact date, Neil. I know every date from 1880. I just don't know it, recently. But what they say is they date the Siloam Tunnel construction before the time of Hezekiah, right? They say the tunnel is earlier, whereas Shlomo Gill puts it later. So you got to look at, and the verdict is still out, I guess you would say.
Right.
But I do think we have enough evidence to at least suggest that Assyrians are coming. Hezekiah is a real person. Hezekiah is a king. You're not going to leave your water outside the gate. You're going to get it inside as quickly as possible to keep the enemy from taking your water.
Yeah, I think like most biblical stories, there's kernels of historical truth there. There's also layers of allegory, mythology. Is also, you get all that. You get with any story. Like the people don't just write stuff out of nowhere. Like these ideas come from something.
Yeah.
So I think with Hezekiah, there's a lot to say. There's a lot of evidence that shows that these stories do have historical truth to it.
Yeah, that's right. And what you're going to see is you do see, I'm pointing this out. I teach a weekly class on Saturday mornings, and we're working through Jeremiah right now. Jeremiah is one of my favorite, not only my favorite person in the Bible, but he's one of my favorite that period of time. So I'm really looking at Jeremiah, and what we do see sometimes, I highly recommend when people want to look at the historical period, whatever you're interested in, like Constellation Pegasus has an interest in a certain time period. So I highly recommend that people look at the story from the sources we have. And even within the Bible, we have sometimes in Kings and Chronicles, we have different reports. They don't line up in every detail. So you have to consider that you do have some political spin from time to time. I've told my friends, the people that study with me, my students, sometimes I'll say it's almost as different in places as CNN and Fox. You read an account in Kings and Chronicles and you're like, what? You telling me Manasseh repented? That isn't what Kings said. So you get some of that. But somewhere, often the truth is somewhere in the middle, right? It's a good place to start.
Yeah, it's like in the Gospels as well. Constellation Pegasus. Oh, by the way, thank you, Yakub, for that question. Constellation Pegasus, how do you stop an outside water supply? Why wouldn't the Assyrians be able to use the same kind of engineering to bed it back?
To get it back is what it means.
Yeah. Interesting ancient engineering capabilities for sure.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, again, these are some thoughts that I had too. If I'm attacking somebody today, if I'm a military strategist and I want to attack, and I think, man, I need to choke them off from their water source. And if, as we suppose, they knew where the water source was, that's going to be the point you're going for anyway. So whether you get control of the water source back or not, that this is new construction. That the water supply is right behind this wall. You don't know how much tunneling he's done, but you could certainly start there if that's where you wanted to. But just one other point, I will tell you that what we know about ancient Jerusalem, let me just say it this way. Look at Jerusalem today. The most easy attack point is in the north, right? So, Neil, if you're going to come in, so Constellation Pegasus question, why don't they just take it back? The eastern side of the city is one of the more difficult to attack. You have the benefit if you're inside the wall of the terrain. The weak point at Jerusalem is not the east, because if you're in the city of David, you've got the Kidron is protecting you. Yes, your water supply is there, but you have a clean shot as the enemy comes up. They have to come up to get you, right? So in one sense, I get your question, and I have entertained the same thinking, but that eastern side's not easy to attack. The north is much easier. So I think that what Hezekiah's engineering is, he's got to protect, he's got to conceal, he's got to enclose that within the walls. But
because they have to go through the Qumran, Dead Sea, all the mountainous region to get to the east, rather than if they come from the north, it's all flat, easy terrain.
Yeah, and if they wanted to attack the eastern side, they would have to enter into, this Kidron up above and come down. And I mean, it's just, it's not the easy point. You're going to attack from the north. If you're going to attack Jerusalem, you're coming from the north. In fact, that's why you read that in the Bible. Remember, Jeremiah gets a vision. He gets two visions. And the second one is, what do you see, Jeremiah? He said, I see a pot tilted from the north. So you go, oh, a pot tilted from the north means that the enemy's coming from the north. And if you read any book on geography of Jerusalem, you're going to see, well, that's where the enemy's going to come from, because it's the easiest way in.
Yeah.
Even today. I mean, the north. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if you guys can see this map. It might be small, but if you're coming from Babylon, obviously you probably wouldn't take an army straight through the desert.
Yeah.
You probably would go along where the water is, where you're on the Euphrates and Tigris, and you'd go north, and then you wouldn't just go right across the Jordan River where you can just get ambushed. You'd probably go around where the land is. So that makes a lot of sense what you're saying, why they would come from the north.
Yeah.
Now, I could be wrong. That was just my total amateur approach to this. I could be missing something, but
no, it's a good point, and we're all basically speculating, but we can do that with a good degree of certainty if we know historically where have the enemies come from when in antiquity, when Israel was attacked, when Israel and or Judah is attacked. You could have people, if Egypt is attacking, then you're going to have them coming up through from the south, where Gaza is today. Right. Most likely that's where you're going to come. You're going to follow
those are the two ways you go through Israel is north.
And look, that's why Jerusalem has a history, as people often in guidebooks you'll read, it's been conquered this many times by, you look through history and you'll see, but it's basically a trek that goes from the north east all the way down to the southwest, and it's like whichever way they're coming,
right?
Generally, that's the two angles, but not the east. It's just a little tougher.
You got 3 times by the Romans, Pompey the Great, Gaius, what's his name? During the time of Augustus, his name was I can't remember his name, but he was one of the generals under Augustus. That happened again. Then it happened with the Vespasian.
Antiochus
the Fourth in the Greeks world. They're just constantly getting the story of Israel in history is so fascinating because they're always wedged between two major empires.
Yeah.
I mean, during the Seleucid period, you have the Ptolemies and Seleucids, and Israel is literally wedged in between these giant empires. Or you would have the Romans and the Parthians, or it was always something. The Egyptians and the Babylonians. Israel was always right in the middle. So it was just a fascinating story.
Oh, it is. It's called, in some books I've read, it's like a land bridge, and that land bridge, unfortunately, has been used plenty to cross from one point to another. This battle, when Assyria, if you study the period, the First Temple period, Constellation Pegasus has asked about, it's a big period of time we're talking about, but you're talking about, you have these world powers. You've got Egypt, you have to know, you've got Assyria, you've got Babylon, you've got all these different kingdoms, in fact, and they're all rising up from time to time.
Yeah.
As one loses its grip on world domination, they're followed in the wings by the next.
I love this map right here, because this is the map of the Antiochus period, post Alexander the Great. You see Macedonian empires split up. You got the Seleucids in yellow. You got the Ptolemies in blue. You see Rome starting to rise up in Carthage. Anyways, look at Jerusalem. Yeah. Notice how Israel is this little rectangle of yellow surrounded by all blue.
Yeah.
Now, why is that? Why am I bringing that up? Because the Seleucids controlled Israel, most of it, but they were surrounded by the Ptolemy Empire. They had all the borderlands. They had the coast. They had so they were surrounded by Ptolemies, but also controlled by Seleucids. Just imagine trying to live there and having these giant Greek empires controlling everything.
Well,
It's
and
mind
in the in the biblical period, you know, when you read these stories of these battles and these different groups and world powers, and you know, when did the Babylonians, when did the Assyrians, you know, you start reading this, and what's fascinating to me is that you look at the biblical text and you get these names that we can go in and validate in other sources. We know these people from different sources. We can go and find evidence of these people. I remember in the last year when I was traveling, we went to the British Museum. You see this huge relief, you know, of Sennacherib, and I mean, just the ancient world knows these people. So when somebody might ask me, you know, you spend a lot of time reading this ancient stuff. I mean, it's fascinating to me.
Yeah.
You know, I want to know the different characters. I want to know the different world powers. I want to read about, if I read a story about Mesha in 2 Kings 3, when I hear that there is a stone that was discovered in 1868 that tells the same story, I want to look at them side by side. What does this one say? What does that one say? If there is an inscription in a tunnel that seems to be associated with the Ge-hinnom, you know, my mind automatically associates the story that we read in 2 Kings 20, 2 Chronicles 32. Now, I'm not going to just say, well, there it is, that proves everything. But what I am going to say is the preponderance of evidence says that the biblical account may shed some light on this historical event. I'll give you an example. Richard Elliott Friedman is one of my favorite scholars for the Pentateuch. And he's by no means a fundamentalist, you know. I mean, he is an academic, particularly in the criticism or analytical study of the Pentateuch. And he said, imagine if we didn't have the Bible. Now, he wrote about this in his book on the Exodus. We didn't have the Bible, and we found all of these key things. So let me give you an example. Let's play like, just for a moment, that we didn't have the biblical text, and in 1880, Jacob Eliyahu just wants to climb through a tunnel, and he finds this ancient inscription. Imagine if people looked at it and they said, well, but then let's say that a week later they find this ancient scroll and it says King Hezekiah made the water come into the city. Can you imagine how it would change things?
Right.
But now, because we have the biblical text, the discoveries that we find now, we should go to the biblical text. But there is a school of thought that says, no, I'm not going to look at the biblical text. You know, they almost refuse to look at it. And you're like, I'm not saying you have to be a fundamentalist, but by goodness, at least take a look at it.
Yeah, I think Maccabees
It would change everything if we didn't have the Bible, because some people they have an a priori position that the biblical text can't be right. Their a priori position is probably going to blind them from seeing something quite amazing, honestly, from time to time. That's the case.
Yeah, I was going to say that I think the book of Maccabees is a good example of having tons of history packed in there. There, like, whoever wrote that story had access to a lot of different sources of what was going on at the time. But I agree with you on that. I think you should at least take a look and see what you can find. You know.
Yeah. Hey, can I bring in a little bit of some exciting stuff now, in case I can't see if you have more super chats, but throw them up.
Do, but it's okay. You could do whatever.
All right, well, let me say this. I touched on it briefly. We have the announcement that has come out about more inscriptions that are found, and I'm going to open it up. I'm not just talking about the Salon Tunnel that's traditionally called Hezekiah's Tunnel. I mean the network of tunneling underneath the city of David, from the Canaanite pool through the Pool of Siloam. We have an announcement came out in December that Professor Gershon Galil, he's at the University of Haifa, former chair of the Department of Jewish History. He and Eli Shukran, I mentioned him early as one of the specialists at the IAA who's done a lot of work in the city of David and the tunneling system and so forth. Announcement came out about 5 inscriptions that were discovered in the Pool of Siloam. I'm sorry, in this system from the Canaanite pool. 5. Now, the criticism, there is a bit of criticism and there's challenge because the announcement wasn't made according to standard scholarly protocol, meaning
Wow, I just found that too.
Gershon Galil didn't put out in an academic publication yet. He didn't put out anything that says, I'm proposing that these inscriptions, 5 monumental inscriptions, tell the story about Hezekiah and the tunneling, bringing water inside the gate. But he is saying, Neil, that at least one of the inscriptions that he discovered says some very interesting things.
Wow, there's some drama going on behind this.
Oh my goodness, man. It's like a soap opera. I am right up in the middle of it.
Dude, on the bottom, at the end of the article, it says, when approached by the Times of Israel, Galil acknowledged that he sees himself as the target of the open letter, which he said was written by bitter and jealous colleagues with an axe to grind, including its initiator, Meir.
Yeah.
So people are just criticizing this his take.
Yeah, well, let me tell you who's not criticizing it yet.
You?
Me. Now, not that it would matter if I did or not, but I tell you, I'm being objective. Okay, so there is a protocol. There's not really, I don't think there's a rule book that says you have to do it this way, but generally, if you're going to claim that you have 5 inscriptions that you've discovered, you need to, allow that to be challenged. Well, here's how it's going to be challenged. Now, I'm looking at notes. I don't like to do that, but I will tell you that he is publishing a book. Eli Shukran and Galil are publishing a book called The Inscriptions of Hezekiah, King of Judah. Now, this book is supposedly coming out. Now, I've talked with Professor Galil on message. I've exchanged messages with him. He's not, he hadn't given me any inside information, but he did say, wait, it's coming. Now, I want to believe this because I love the study of the ancient world. I love archaeology, and I hope he's right. I also recognize that the proof is in the pudding. Until it comes out, because we don't have really good photographs. But get this, Neil, this is what I'm excited about. Again, none of this is proved. Please don't think I'm saying that this is, I'm saying here's the allegation.
Sure.
You were with me and we're looking down inside. That's another one, by the way. So this is, this is the 3rd. I've written about all of these on my academia page, Neil, if people want to check that out.
Sure.
But I've written, this is the Jerusalem stone tablet inscription. There's the Mount Ophel curse amulet. So there's a bunch of stuff out there. Each of these 3 incidents, there are 3 major ones. The curse amulet at Mount Ophel, that was released, that was announced, but they didn't put it through academic channels. They claim that it's one of the greatest discoveries because this Jerusalem inscription is found, by the way, in the same area near Siloam, city of David, and this is considered one of the earliest inscriptions, if he's right. So anyway, so the world is, you have a group, the thing you pulled up a moment ago, 32 scholars, basically without naming Galil, although he picks up that they're talking about him, says, we don't do things like this. I want to say let them say that. I'm waiting for the proof.
Right.
I'm going to tell you right now, Neil, as soon as that book shows up, I'm going to buy it, and I'm going to get that bad boy sent to my house expedited, quick as possible.
Sure.
Because I'm excited. Because listen to this. When we first walk in and you're filming, bring in the Gnostic, you're going to get exposed to true gnosis right here, and you're filming, and we look down in the Canaanite pool. Now, you can't go down there. Remember, that's not open to the public, but down in the pool, it's called the Canaanite pool. These tunnels have been numbered. There was a tablet. Now, remember, in the Salon Tunnel, Neil, that inscription was written on a tablet. And I told you it was framed, and then it was prepared for writing, and someone in antiquity inscribed an inscription. That's on the south. At the north, on the right-hand side of Tunnel 4 at the Canaanite pool, there is a tablet. It was discovered in 1909 by a guy by the name of Vincent. Vincent found the tablet, and look, Neil, he looks at it, and he says, oh, they didn't write anything on it. It was prepared for writing, but no one wrote anything on it. And that's a different photo you're showing there.
Okay.
That's a different story.
Okay.
But that's okay. But that it also involves our boy Galil, our Professor Galil.
Yeah.
But this tablet that was discovered, that's been announced by Eli Shukran and Galil, he says it's 11 lines, 64 words, 243 letters. This is not insignificant.
Wow.
Let me tell you. So again, for 113 years, we've known about this tablet. It's at the north. It's not at the south where the other ones. We've known the tablet's there for 113 years. The same story has been put forward. It's a tablet, but no one ever wrote on it. You want to hear what he says was written on it?
Yeah, let's hear it.
All right, let me find this. I'm going to use his message to me.
Nice.
And by the way,
So is this even leaked out yet or no?
It is, yes.
Okay.
So I don't have any secret, but I just wanted to use the message that that he sent me because he was responding. Okay, so this is called inscription number 3. So in other words, he's writing a book with about 5 inscriptions. He says he reads it. He's looking. Let me make sure everybody understands. He's looking at a tablet with a frame around it from the ancient world, and he says that he sees letters no one else has seen. And he's going to publish in his book good photographs where we can look at it too. I'll have to come back on when that happens. Okay, definitely. Here we go. Ready for the translation? Get ready. Hezekiah, the son of Ahaz, king of Judah, made the pool and the conduit in the 17th year and the 2nd day in the 4th month of King Hezekiah. The king brought the water into the city by a tunnel. The king led the water into the pool. He smote the Philistines from Ekron to Gaza and placed there the Oreb unit of the army of Judah. He broke the images, broke in pieces the Nehushtan. He removed the high places, cut down Asherah. Hezekiah the king accumulated in all his treasure houses and in the house. I'm not finished. House of Yod-Heh Vav-Heh, a lot of silver and gold, perfumes, and good ointment.
Wow.
Now here's the deal. If I'm going to tell you I read an inscription and I'm not being true, I'm going to say, look, I saw part of the name Hezekiah, and it's 11 lines, Neil. Now, I'm not saying he doesn't see that and that it's not really there. Imagine what if it proves true, if it's tested and we determine that it's ancient. So anyway, so I'm writing back and forth to him. I said, wow, is that in the tunnel? Because I don't know where he's talking about. He saw this. He says, no, it's in the Canaanite pool. I said, okay, I wanted to make sure. he said, I said, thanks for helping me understand. I want to make sure I really get this. Where exactly? Because I want to know, because I'm going to go back to Jerusalem many times. And if he'll tell me where it's at, I'm going to hike in there and go see it if I can. But he says it's near Tunnel 4 on the right-hand side of the entrance to Tunnel 4. Now, that's just one. He actually is claiming that within the Siloam Tunnel, he's found other inscriptions. So
where would this be? Because I remember, what is this? Where is he finding this stuff? Isn't everything already been dug out and looked at?
Well, that's his point. He says no.
Oh, wow.
You know, he's saying they're claiming, if he's right, this will be some of the greatest archaeological discoveries of all time, particularly the thing I just read.
Right. And that's Asherah too. That's dating it right there.
What's that?
The time periods of knocking down Asherah would be specific to early on. Like this would be going back to, right?
It's basically, yeah, to your point, he's basically what they're suggesting. This almost matches 2 Kings 18. If you read 2 Kings 18, you're going to get a story about all the cool stuff that Hezekiah did, the godly thing that he led when he led this great revival. So one of the things he destroys is Nehushtan, it says. Now, what is Nehushtan? According to the biblical record in the book of Numbers, chapter 21, the children of Israel rebel against Moses and against God, and snakes bite them. And Moses is told, make a serpent, put him on a stick. And then they begin to worship this. So in 2 Kings 18:4, Hezekiah, one of his reforms is to destroy the Nehushtan, and he does. So, and you mentioned Asherah, all of these things. So what this is, if this inscription proves true, and Galil and Shukran are right, and I hope they are, and it dates to the time of Hezekiah, this will be the oldest validation of a story that we have in the biblical record. Now, if it doesn't, then his career is shot. But if it does, you see the gamble here. If it does, this is the most incredible thing that's ever been discovered.
He's going for the glory in this one.
Hey, either you in or you out, baby. You want in? So I think this is fascinating, and I want to know. Like I said, I can't wait. There are other inscriptions. Let me just say this.
Sure.
I posted. You might not know why I was doing this, but a while back I sent you and Derek a note, and I said, "Hey, man, I need those pictures you guys took with your good cameras of me right there by because I didn't know, but I wanted to look." I posted a cover photo for my Facebook page of me. I think you took the photo, you or Neil, Derek, where I'm pointing at the replica of the Siloam inscription. Professor Galil writes me and he says, basically, I'm paraphrasing, look closely, Ross. He's saying that behind the replica, which is 2 feet to the north of where the Siloam inscription that was dug out of the wall, 2 feet to the north where they put the replica, not where it was actually found, the replica. He says that behind that sign are other ancient letters. So I'm thinking, you got to be kidding me. I was that close. Now, you know what made me laugh is that when we were standing there and you guys were filming and the two little boys ran in and they're talking in Arabic or whatever, and I didn't know what they were saying. I have kicked myself. What if those little boys were saying, look, there's an inscription right there. And we're like, get out of here, kid.
Yeah, we call them demons, remember?
Yeah, it's like we were chasing them off. They might have been telling the truth, man.
Because right before they ran down there, you were telling us about the jinn. They're like, there's the Islam, when Islam was dominant here, when the Ottomans lived here, even before that, the story was there was a jinn down here.
Yeah, they're little genies.
Come down here to get the jinn and ask them questions. And also, as soon as you said that, the little kids ran down. We're like, hey,
well, it kind of scared me because you're not supposed to come in from the south, I'm thinking, whoa, and
and then somebody in our camp was like, they're demons. We're all laughing at them. They were laughing at us too. It was a good time.
Yeah, it was good. It was good. But so we've got with Siloam, just so you know, the reason this is so important, we do have biblical record of a project of a king by the name of Hezekiah, who is attested through archaeological discovery as being a real person, a king of Judah. In fact, on the bulla that we have, you showed it a few minutes ago. It is actually indicative of a monarchical bulla. I mean, and we have other evidence that he existed. So we know there's a king Hezekiah. We know at his time that Assyria also testifies that they were fighting Hezekiah and that they caged him up like a bird. We know from the biblical record in 4 places that he dug some type of water system to put the water inside the city because he's being attacked. We know all these things. And now we've got an inscription in the Salon Tunnel. We've got 2 scholars saying that we have to just wait, but we've got 5 more inscriptions. By the way, the one I read even gives us a date. It says it gives us a month, a day, everything. So, I mean, the verdict is still out, but it's very interesting.
Here's an interesting comment or question, I should say. Thank you, Flip Flopsky, for the super chat. Filled cisterns inside the walls and stopped up the indefensible well?
Filled systems inside the walls and stopped up. Okay. No, I think I know what Flip Flopsky's asking there. The English says stopped up. So but I don't really think that that's the best translation, because the word translated in the JPS, maybe the ESV, I don't remember what King James, a lot of the English translations translate the word, the Hebrew word there as stopped up. He stopped up the well, but he brought the water in. That, I'm like you, that doesn't make sense, Flip Flopsky. But the word in Hebrew can mean concealed or to cover, to build around it. And so I think a better translation is that it was concealed and not stopped up, because once you stop it up, you're not going to fill cisterns. Well, you just, unless you fill a big cistern, and that's not what he did. So yeah, it doesn't make sense. He wouldn't have done that. Good question.
That answers that. Good question, Flip Flopsky. Thank you for that super chat. And Gina McDonald, thank you. What was the final outcome of the war in Hezekiah? What's the aftermath? That's a good question.
Yep. Well, it is a good question, and thanks for that, Gina. What we know is that it was looking very dire. Early on, Hezekiah is in trouble, basically. What happens is Assyria leaves, Judah lives for another day. Well, what we find is that now the northern kingdom of Israel prior to this is taken captive by Assyria. They're gone. But Judah would survive and would survive and remain strong in the area to some degree until 587 BCE, when the Babylonians conquered Jerusalem. So ultimately they were conquered and carried away captive. That's the story as the Bible and history presents it. History would oblige. And ultimately, the kingdom of Judah, remember the kingdom of Israel's in the north, they're already gone. Assyria did beat them, did not beat Judah. So that was the outcome of the battle. It later, the Babylonian, in fact, what's interesting is that when the Babylonians are coming in 587 BCE, you get to really, when you really start unpeeling that story, you see that Assyria is still an empire, but it's the uprising, if you will, of the Babylonians at that time. So Assyria is starting to wane, and the Babylonians come and conquer Israel in the end. So, or Judah, I should say, the kingdom of Judah.
Yeah.
Who's this handsome fella? Is that Babylon?
Nebuchadnezzar.
Nebuchadnezzar, yeah.
And I was just going to pull up this last map real quick just to show this Babylonian empire that comes in and sweeps all the Middle East pretty much.
Yeah.
The Persian Gulf to the Nile, and even in a little bit of Turkey, you see that.
Oh yeah.
So that's basically was the fate of that time period. But yeah, but if I'm not mistaken, because the question does say and Hezekiah doesn't live. He dies before he lived. Let me stop. Hold on. me rephrase this. He doesn't see the day of Nebuchadnezzar. He dies before that.
Right.
So,
right.
so he actually has sort of a good ending where he survives. Everything's good under his reign. It's the next guy, Josiah. Is that his name, Josiah?
Well, you have Manasseh next, right? So
Right.
Hezekiah, Manasseh, he reigns for a pretty good while. After Manasseh, then, as you start getting into, Josiah is going to be the king that is the last good king. He reigns for 31 years. He assumes the throne, and he's going to reign. He dies by an arrow from Necho of Egypt.
Right.
But after Josiah, it's a quick rundown. So you have Josiah's kids. You could basically list them off. Once you have Jehoiakim, you have Shalom or Jeconiah. Then after Jeconiah, then you ultimately end up with Zedekiah. Zedekiah rules 11 years. All these other guys, just a little short period of time. But Babylon is pulling the strings. They're just setting it up for the conquer. They're toying almost with Judah once Josiah is out of the way. And ultimately, Jerusalem is taken in 587 BCE. Zedekiah is the king. He's been king for 11 years, but it's a bad story.
How long does it take between Hezekiah and the final fall of Judah? How many years is that, roughly?
So Hezekiah, standard dating that it's really hard to say. If you look at these chronology charts, they're different. Yeah. People come up with different dating schemes. I mentioned this in a class the other day. So let's say that Hezekiah rules from 787 or 715 to 687. All right. So roughly 100 years. So from the time of the death of Hezekiah, you've got roughly 100 years, give or take. I mean, we don't know exactly. All these chronologies are slightly different, but it's not long. I mean, not in the grand scheme of history, it's not very long, but I would say about 100 years. And by the way, Hezekiah is a very godly king, and Josiah, according to the record, is a very godly king. But other than that, you don't have that many righteous kings. They become measured in the literature that we have. How many times have you read when you study this? And they did according to the
most of the kings in the text they're going back to Asherah and the idols, which makes me. And so there's two ways to look at this. You look at it from the perspective, like, okay, they're not righteous. They're not following Israel's ways. They're not following the traditional Orthodox Jew. The way I look at it is that polytheism was still thriving.
Yeah.
And the kings weren't looked at as evil in the time period. They were just doing what was normal in the time period. But later on, when they write these stories in Kings and Chronicles, in a time period when they're writing it, they're looking back in their perspective and saying, oh, they were polytheists. Okay, they were going to idols and Asherah.
Well, I'll tell you, it's interesting. Whenever they're written, what we do see is that, and this is why I like to study the material, even though you may have a little bit of spin, you may have a little bit that this king was so righteous, whatever. But what you also get is you get some bare bones fact that seems to come out.
Exactly.
Like Josiah, one of the things I'm teaching about right now, Josiah, if you read Kings and Chronicles, it says a great revival took place. Chronicles says that King Josiah brings the people in front of him, and they all swear allegiance. Remember, they found a Torah scroll at the time, the scroll that Moses wrote. So right. This great revival and all that. But you have two prophets that are prophesying at the time of Josiah's, during his reign. Their names are Jeremiah and Zephaniah. So you think if there's a great revival, Chronicles says this, Neil. Chronicles says during the whole days of Josiah, the people followed God's ways. Now that tells me if I go to Jeremiah and Zephaniah, which claim to be written at the same time, I ought to see, boy, everything's going great. If you're Jeremiah, you can look out the window and go, man, it's so nice to see these people.
That's not what it says.
But that's not what it says. It says you're going down. this place is going down. It's going to burn to the ground, you know, and all that.
Wow.
So you get sort of a telltale. So earlier we had a question about historical accuracy. You sort of get both. I mean, you get some of the truth from the historical record, and then you match that against the biblical text, and you say, you know, and sometimes the text gives two sides to the story. I think that what we get, particularly with Hezekiah, since we're talking mainly about Siloam, Hezekiah most likely was very righteous. Hezekiah tried to do the right thing. He was at least remembered as a very good and godly king who did good things for the people of his day.
Right.
You know, and I think that if we have monumental records that support that, I think that would be quite fascinating. You know,
Yeah.
we all have favorite. I know people differ in their political views, and even your listeners or viewers do. So I don't. To me, it doesn't matter where someone falls out. It's not my field. But we all have our favorite political leaders. You know, in our lifetime, we look and say, "Oh, I really like this person," or "This person did a lot of good for the economy."
Right.
That's going to vary. Well, in the biblical account, you get that same stuff.
Right.
You do. You get certain people who tend to be more inclined towards a certain ruler. There are political leaders that they liked in antiquity. I say they probably 50%.
Right.
Back to one of the discoveries that Galil claims, this Canaanite curse, the Jerusalem stone tablet inscription. If he's right in his transcription, again, I put my own understanding of this on my academia page, where I take a crack at it. And I even created a key on my academia page where people can go have some fun with one of the most ancient scripts. I show them the letters that are in there, and I say, now go find it. You can print it out like a coloring sheet.
Yeah.
But it's basically this. It says, "Cursed are you, cursed, 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 ruler of the city, governor of the city, curse, you'll die, curse you, curse you." Well, let me tell you, people, whoever took the time to engrave that in a stone tablet, they didn't vote for the governor of the city that they were writing about. They wanted him to die a miserable death.
Wow.
So you have political tension at the time. But what I find interesting about a figure like Hezekiah is they seem to be one of those that kind of transcends party. You know, again, are there any presidents in American history that most people, whether their views are different today, they could look at those people and say, you know, that's an Abraham Lincoln or that. I'm not saying everybody needs to like Abraham, I'm just saying.
Sure.
But Hezekiah seems to be one of those guys in the Bible that just everybody loved him. And you can understand that, because to the question a moment ago, how did this battle turn out? They lived to see another day.
Yeah.
They had water. The Assyrians, yes, they came, but they went the same way they came, the Bible says. They didn't attack.
100 years is a long time too. People, like, it's almost like when you read the text, you're like, yeah, Hezekiah, you know, he almost pulled it off, but they end up getting conquered anyway. But it's like, but wait a minute, pause it. 100 years went by.
Yeah.
That's like the difference between us and before World War II.
Oh, yeah.
World War I, actually.
World War I is actually a good example.
So that's a long time that went by before they ended up falling. But, you know, it's not,
that's right.
That's a good question, and thank you for that super chat. Constellation Pegasus with another one. Thank you, Constellation. I'm remembering now. The Romans came from the north and had fits taking Jerusalem.
Yeah, see, it's the north. That's the way you're going to come. If you have a chance, if you have a chance of taking it, particularly in the ancient world, that's where it's coming from. Because the lay of the land, that's the only way to do it.
That's a good point. And there's another one from Constellation Pegasus. And thank you for that, by the way. Here it is. That inscription verifies ancient Israelites were aware and believe God had a wife being outside of the city of Jerusalem influence. Asherah being directly named. By the way, that word Asherah, I think, means wife too. So what do you think about that? It's interesting.
I guess Constellation Pegasus is referring to the new inscription that Galil claims to have found at Tunnel 4 on the tablet. And so the quick answer to that is that inscription verifies that at the time that the people were inclined to believe in this Asherah and worship Asherah, which is exactly what the Bible says. So it's not like the inscription is saying something new.
Right.
What this is doing is actually something more interesting, in my opinion. Yes, you're right. It is saying that the people of the day did look to Asherah as, this deity, but at the same time, it's confirming the biblical account that Hezekiah said, we're not doing that here, and destroyed it. So, yeah, interesting though. It is fascinating.
I always love looking at those other angles like that. Constellation, thank you for that. And I'm not even kidding. It's another one from Constellation Pegasus. He's just dropping them on me right now. Thank you. I really appreciate it. I see the map where the spring is. Evidently, the Assyrians would be under constant attack getting to it. Explains why Romans didn't target it, if I'm looking at the maps correctly.
That again is to the point about this eastern side being partly fortified by the geography, by the lay of the land. Excuse me. It's a tough place to attack, and so any group that tries to come, if you look at a map, you can Google this and look at elevation. That Kidron, you remember, Neil, remember when Dr. Tabor led us down from the Mount of Olives and we walked all the way past the tombs in the Kidron Valley and we came back up? You remember all that?
Yeah.
So, that valley is pretty deep. So you have to think about, it is a fortification just by the lay of the land. So, to your point, Constellation Pegasus, if you're going to attack, you don't want to you're not going to prefer the eastern side of the city.
Yeah, it's very mountainy and lots of rivers and it's a really rough terrain. It's not going to be easy. But anyways, yeah, that's a good point. Thank you for that super chat. And there's one more. I think there's one more. Yeah, there's one more. Yaakov Insraim, thank you for the super chat. What is the significance of Hezekiah's name, Might God, and his son being named Emmanuel, God is with us?
It's a good question. What we get, particularly in the biblical accounts, is names have meaning, and when you look at these, you talk about Isaiah, Yeshayahu, Jeremiah, Yirmiyahu, Hezekiah, Chazak. What a name means is often very important, interestingly enough, in the work that they do. And Hiskiyahu, for instance, it really is interesting because he does fortify on behalf, according to the biblical account, he fortifies his city. We read that in Kings and Chronicles, and even this passage from Isaiah 22 and the one in the Apocrypha as well. So those names have meanings, and I think what you're referring to is this understanding that Isaiah, if you're looking at Isaiah, who's a contemporary with Hezekiah, that you get this passage beginning in Isaiah chapter 7, but the story continues into chapter 8 and so forth. And Isaiah is told to, it's this story about a child being born, and the name, according to the text, is, let's see, shall call his name Yoetz El Gibor Aviad Sar Shalom. Wonderful Pele Yoetz El Gibor Aviad Sar Shalom is the name of this child. The name means wonderful counselor, mighty one for God, everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. A lot of Christians will interpret this as a prediction of the Messiah, but it appears in the text of Isaiah to refer to this particular time. And some interpreters, based on Yaakov's question, would say that that coming one would be called by these names. So what we do know is that that's a very pivotal period. And as he points out, the follow-up name is God is with us. So you want to think that if you are in that time, the Assyrians are at the door, they're coming to attack, but for some reason, they go back home and Jerusalem is left for another day. They'll live for another 100 years. If you're writing about that at that time, it's like the Bob Dylan song, God on Our Side. You know, you're going to view it like, well, God saved us. And I live in a place where hurricanes come. And you know, if a hurricane is supposed to hit, you know, in our area, and it people are praying, don't let it hit us. I guess you don't want to say make it hit Alabama, but when the next morning, if you wake up and the storm didn't hit you, everybody who didn't get hit by the storm says, God answered my prayer. He didn't answer their prayer.
Yeah.
But maybe it's something like that. I don't mean to make fun. It's not really funny, but you know, that's the way it works.
Yeah, it is. It's always
so if you're living in Hezekiah's time, and you would say, well, God's with us.
Thank you for that super chat, Yaakov. That's the last one. Before we go, though, I do want to show everyone who's watching, there's 150 people that are watching right now. Please go right now. You can come back to this video after and go and subscribe and hit that bell, because Ross puts out really good content. He talks about all types of biblical history, Hebrew Bible stuff. He goes deep. He's also a hands-on approach guy. He will go to Israel or Egypt or Babylon. He'll go and look at the site and get his own opinion on it based on what he sees, and he'll talk about it on his channel. Also, on top of that, don't forget, he's got this book. He's got his book out, the Moses Scroll. That link is in the description as well, so check that out too. But definitely go and subscribe. That's free. You don't got to pay for that. Go hit the subscribe button. Costs you nothing. You get good content. And anything else you want to talk and discuss before we go?
I'll tell you what, Neil, this has been incredibly fun. And just because I know how valuable time is, I want to thank all the people who joined in and listened. And thanks to all the super chats. But thanks for everybody who took their time to join. And I would say the same about your channel, Neil. I watched a video you put out the other night. So it's good content. Look, these people, you have a very mature, educated group that follow you, and they could be watching anything or reading a good book. So thanks to everybody for joining us. And I look forward to being back with you. And maybe one day we can go back to the Holy Land. I'm bringing a group to Egypt and Jordan next fall. If anybody wants to join me, that video is the promo video is on the page on my YouTube channel. So they may want to go with me to Egypt, Jordan, and Israel next fall.
That's a good point.
This fall, November.
That's a good point. If you guys want to go out there and be with somebody who knows the land and be a guide, look into what Ross is setting up for the next couple months. You're always doing trips over there and looking for people to join the bus. I'm telling you, it might not be the next one, but the one after that, I'll probably be at that one.
Good deal.
Yeah. So real quick, there's a last minute question from somebody who, real quick, I sorry to throw this on you, but you know, people do have questions. Ask Ross now, would not the 17th year and 4th month of Hezekiah either have been on July 20th, 711 or January 20th, 710, 3 years after the 185,000 were slain in 713? That's a tough question.
It really is, and I wish that I had the mind to work that out on the fly. But I tell you what I'm going to do. I will make a note of that and go in and look and see how specific I can get, because I do love looking at the calendars.
Right.
It would be interesting to me if that particular date was coming up, because who knows? You could have all kind of fun with that. So while I appreciate the question, P. Hummer, I'm not exactly able to do that kind of math on the fly.
Yeah, that's
Math
tough.
was never my strong point, but thanks for the question, and I'll look at it.
Yeah, definitely. And by the way, P Hummer, that gives you another excuse to go subscribe to Ross Nichols, because you're gonna get that answer probably in the next live, right? Or something, maybe. I'm just saying
Did
maybe,
you
right?
did you say the next life?
Live. Live
Oh,
stream.
next live.
Next life.
Okay.
Yes. But
You get
maybe.
that in the next life.
Yeah, you might. I don't know. It's worth checking out. I would hit the subscribe button and definitely do that. And by the way, I really, really enjoyed this. We got to do this more often. Yeah, thank you for your time, Ross. Really, really, seriously. And
Well, everybody have a wonderful rest of your Sunday. And again, thanks for your time. And Neil, it's always good talking to you, man.
always. And I'm looking forward to going out to the Holy Land again, either maybe next year or next winter or something, whenever the next one is. Maybe not the direct next one, but we are going to go back.
I'll tell you what I'll do. If I find something really cool, I'll be there next month. If I find something really cool, I'll message you and let you know.
Definitely. I'm looking forward. And we got to get Petra next time. I missed
Petra. Oh, yeah.
So,
yep.
And you've just attained true gnosis.
You have just attained true gnosis. The demiurge has no power over you.